I will never forget the afternoon my name became a joke. I, Mary Johnson, 62 years old, mother of an only son, went from being mum to being the ridiculous old lady in front of thousands of strangers. It all started with the sound of the phone. A neighbour called me, her voice choked up, saying my son, Andrew, had posted something about me online. "It's on TikTok, Mary. Please don't look at it," she said. But I saw it, and I wish I hadn't. The video began with him entering my house with a camera in hand, without me noticing. I was in the kitchen, humming a tune while stirring a pot of turkey chili. Andrew approached from behind, with that smile I had so often mistaken for affection, and began to imitate my voice. "Look at my mum," he said, laughing. "She still thinks she can look good with that 80s hairstyle in her 60s. Ridiculous old lady." The comments piled up underneath. Laughing emojis, cruel phrases, taunts. People were laughing at my wrinkled hands, my simple clothes, my unfiltered words. It was my son who was leading them, who was encouraging them to insult. I felt a sharp punch in my chest. The phone screen blurred with my tears. In that instant, I remembered the day he came into the world. A fragile baby squeezing my finger tightly. I remembered the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the years of work, sewing, cooking, cleaning other people's houses to pay for his college tuition. All that, just to see him now laughing at me in front of an invisible crowd. I sat down in silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry anymore. I turned off the phone, put it on the table, and took a deep breath. An old picture of Andrew as a child hung on the wall. His arms were around my neck, and he was saying, "I love you, Mama." I felt a hole open up in my soul. I didn't understand when that love had turned into contempt. But before I continue, I want to give you a special invitation. Have you subscribed to the channel and hit like on the video yet? This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below with which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes and heard the laughter, the mocking voices. I felt small, invisible. Every word of the video burned inside me. But the worst part was thinking that Andrew didn't even do it out of anger. He did it for fun, for followers. The next morning, I went out to buy a bagel and noticed the stares. A couple murmured, "That's the lady from TikTok." I walked with my head down, pretending not to hear, but inside, every step hurt. When I got home, I saw that my son had posted another video. He and his girlfriend, Lauren, imitating me, pretending that I was scolding them like when he was a kid. Thousands of likes, thousands of laughing comments. I didn't cry that day. Something inside me hardened. I went to the room and opened the old wooden chest where I kept my life documents. The deeds to the house, the contracts for the 2 rental apartments, the savings I'd managed after so many years of work. Andrew always believed everything we had came from an inheritance. But the truth was different. I built it all alone, with my hands, my tears, my tired body. I took the papers, spread them on the table, and looked at them calmly, not out of greed, but out of dignity. I remembered my mother's words, "Never hit back with anger, honey. Return the blow with wisdom." That night, looking at myself in the mirror, I swore I wouldn't allow anyone, not even my son, to make me feel less again. I didn't know how or when, but his mockery would come at a price. And it wouldn't be immediate or cruel. It would be fair. I turned on the lamp, opened a notebook, and wrote the first lines of a plan. Not for revenge, but for justice. That kind of justice that life owes to all mothers who break their backs for their children, only to discover one day that those children only learned to laugh at their effort. When I finished writing, I turned off the light and sat by the window. Outside, the moon illuminated the empty street. Somewhere, Andrew was still recording his videos, convinced that I knew nothing. But I did know, and for the first time in many years, I had something he had lost long ago. Silence, strength, and control. I slept peacefully that night, not because I felt vindicated, but because I was no longer afraid. The ridiculous old lady had woken up. The days that followed the video were a relentless punishment. Every time I went to the grocery store or walked toward the church, I felt people's eyes drilling into my back. Some avoided looking at me out of pity, others whispered between laughs. No one needed to say it out loud. Everyone had seen the ridiculous old lady from TikTok. The greatest pain wasn't the mockery itself, but the loneliness. No one dared to ask how I was, and Andrew didn't show up at the house. I heard from another neighbor that he had been invited to a local show in New York City to talk about his success on social media, and that he even boasted about how he turned everything into content. Even my mum, who was always a character, he said, laughing. The audience laughed with him. I, in front of the television, could only turn it off and stare at my reflection in the black screen. The nights were long. I slept little. Sometimes I opened my phone just to check if the video was still there, with millions of views. Every comment was a dagger. The old lady is hilarious. How embarrassing for him. Poor guy, having a mother like that. No one knew that this woman they were insulting had cleaned floors, ironed other people's clothes, and gone hungry so her son could have a life she could never dream of. I tried to understand what had happened to Andrew. I remembered the child who hugged me when he came home from school, the young man who told me that everything he did was to give me a better life. Where had that son of mine gone? At what moment did his gaze become cold, calculating, devoid of tenderness? One Sunday, leaving Mass, Father Michael took my arm and said gently, "Mary, don't carry this cross alone. God knows a mother's heart can break and still keep beating." I smiled at him, but couldn't answer. Tears burned in my eyes. It wasn't faith I lacked. It was hope. That afternoon, returning home, I found a cardboard box at the door. Inside were my own photos, some torn, others scratched with marker. I recognized my son's handwriting on one of them. It read, "Update your style, Mum. It's not the 80s anymore." I sat on the floor, my hands trembling. For the first time in a long time, I felt rage. A pure, dry rage, different from the pain. It was the rage of someone who finally sees the unadorned truth. I didn't cry anymore. I put the photos away carefully and went straight to the room where I kept the document chest. I opened it slowly. There were the deeds, the rental contracts, the papers for the business Andrew thought was his. Everything in my name. All the fruit of my effort. As I arranged them on the table, I understood that power is not in the money, but in the story behind every dollar, and I didn't owe mine to anyone. That night, the silence was different. It no longer hurt. It felt like a new coat. I walked to the hallway mirror and observed myself. The wrinkles that used to shame me now seemed like medals. Each one represented a sacrifice, a battle won, a sleepless night. "Ridiculous old lady," I repeated softly. "No, Mary. Strong old lady." That was the first time I spoke to myself with pride. The days passed and calm became my ally. Andrew didn't call me, but I saw him online. Expensive dinners, interviews, his girlfriend Lauren showing off new designer bags, and trips paid for with collaborations. All of it built upon the humiliation of his mother. I said nothing. I didn't report him. I didn't confront him. I watched him from a distance, with the patience of someone waiting for the fire to burn out on its own. One morning, while watering the plants, a neighbour approached. It was Martha, a woman whose tongue was always quicker than her heart. "Oh, Mary," she said, feigning sympathy. "Don't take it so personally. Young people are like that now, you know. They'll do anything for fame." I smiled with a calm she didn't expect from me. "Yes, Martha," I replied. "But some things time collects on its own." She looked at me confused, not understanding. But I understood. That same afternoon, I went to the bank, withdrew a portion of my savings, and began to reorganize my accounts. The teller asked if I wished to keep my son as a beneficiary. I replied with a serene smile, "No, not anymore. He chose his own path." I signed the papers without trembling. Every signature was a stitch in a wound. I slept better that night than ever before. Outside it was raining, and the sound of the water against the roof lulled me like an old song. In my dreams, I saw Andrew as a child, playing with a paper airplane. The plane flew high, but when it tried to come back to me, the wind pushed it far away. I woke up with a certainty. The time had come to let my son face the wind he himself had unleashed. I lit a candle next to the portrait of my late husband and whispered, "I promise I won't cause harm, but I also won't allow them to keep laughing at me." And as the flame danced in silence, I felt something being reborn inside me. Not the desire for revenge, but the strength of dignity. Andrew didn't know it yet, but his game was about to end. The afternoon sun was falling over my window when I heard the sound of an engine shutting off in front of my house. I peeked out, and there they were. Andrew, with his arrogant smile, and Lauren, his girlfriend, getting out of a new car. She wore a tight dress, dark sunglasses, and that air of superiority that had made my stomach turn from day one. He, on the other hand, arrived as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't made his own mother a laughingstock to the world. They knocked on the door without waiting for an answer, and entered as if it were still their house. I was in the living room, sewing an old curtain, when Lauren approached and said with a fake smile, "Your little house is so cute, Mrs. Johnson. It has that vintage charm." Andrew let out a laugh. "Yeah, the charm of the 70s, he added, looking around. "But don't worry, honey. All this will change soon." I said nothing. I simply continued sewing, as if they were two strangers who had entered my house by mistake. But every word of theirs dug into me like a thorn. Andrew kept talking, with that insolent tone he had learned online. "Lauren and I are thinking of moving here while the renovations on the apartment are finished. Besides, you're getting old, Mom. You could use some company." "Company?" I asked without looking at him. "Oh, you mean live-in help?" He shrugged and gave a short, dry laugh, the same one he used in his videos when he wanted to provoke. Lauren walked over to the shelf where the family photos were. She picked up one of Andrew as a child, hugging me, and looked at it mockingly. "Oh, how sweet. Although I have to admit, the haircut you gave him was a crime." Andrew laughed again. "Yeah, and the sweater she knitted for me. Awful." That was the last straw. I put the needle on the table and stood up slowly. I looked at them with a serenity that disconcerted them. "Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is?" I asked them. "That you don't realize how pathetic it is. To laugh at someone who loved you so much." Lauren raised an eyebrow and looked at me scornfully. "Oh, Mom, don't take it so seriously. It's just humor. Everyone does it now." "No, dear," I replied. "Not everyone humiliates the person who gave them life." Andrew scoffed, as if my words were the buzz of a mosquito. "Mom, don't start with your drama. Stop playing the victim, will you?" Everything you have thanks to me. I'm the one who puts myself out there, the one who generates income, the one who—" I interrupted him without raising my voice. Thanks to you? I approached slowly, looked him in the eye, and said with a calm that made him take a step back. I washed floors with these hands, Andrew. I sewed dresses until my fingers bled. I was both your mother and your father. You only inherited the fruit of my exhaustion. The silence became so heavy I could hear the clock ticking. Lauren took a step back, uncomfortable, but Andrew just shrugged. Mum, we're not in your time anymore. The world belongs to those who adapt. If you don't get it, it's not my fault. I didn't respond. I walked to the door and opened it wide. You're right, I told them. We're not in my time anymore. But there's something that never changes: respect. And today, in this house, you have lost it. Now get out. Andrew was furious. Are you kicking me out? Out of my own house? Your house, I replied coldly, is in my name. It always has been. His eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't known. Lauren looked at him sideways, as if she had just realized something important. What do you mean, in your name? Andrew asked, confused. Exactly that, I said in a firm voice. Nothing you think is yours belongs to you. Not this house, not the apartments, not the accounts. Everything is in my name. Lauren turned to him, annoyed. Didn't you tell me it was yours? That you had bought it? Shut up, Andrew yelled, red with rage. That was years ago. I didn't know that. I closed the door softly, cutting off their argument. Come back when you learn how to behave. I watched them leave through the window, Lauren walking fast, furious, and Andrew hitting the steering wheel of the car before driving away. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt power. Not the power of money, but the power of truth. That night I opened the old chest where I kept all the documents. I spread them out on the table and looked at them calmly. Each piece of paper was a witness to my struggle, each signature a trace of my sacrifice. You thought you could humiliate me, I whispered to the air. But you forgot something, son. The one who builds with love is not afraid of losing anything. I picked up the phone, called the lawyer, and asked for an appointment. I want to make some changes to my accounts, I told him. It's time to put everything in order. I hung up, turned off the light, and sat in front of the window. Outside, the moon lit up the empty streets. Inside me, a decision had already been made. Andrew would learn his lesson. Not through yelling or hatred, but through emptiness. Because when a son loses respect, the only thing a mother can teach him is distance. And in that distance, Andrew would discover what it truly means to be alone. That night, after Andrew and Lauren's visit, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house was thick, almost unbearable, but behind it there was a strange peace, as if my soul was telling me that I was finally on the right path. Through the gloom, memories began to return, one after another, like leaves swept by the wind. I remembered everything he never knew, everything I kept silent to protect him. Andrew always believed he was born into a well-off home, that the house was an inheritance from his father, and that the apartments were a natural result of an organized life. But the truth was different. There was no inheritance, no luck, no miracles. Only my hands, my sleepless nights, and a strength that often came from hunger. When I became a widow, Andrew was barely 6 years old. His father, Ernest, died in a construction accident. I remember watching him leave that morning with his lunch in a plastic bag and a tired smile. He never came back. That night, I brought him back in a box, and although everyone said, "At least you have your son," no one imagined what came next. I lost my job shortly after. Debts piled up. I found myself alone, with a hungry child and rent I couldn't pay. I took refuge in a room loaned by a neighbour and started sewing for the ladies in the neighbourhood. Sometimes I worked until my vision blurred. Other nights I ironed until my hands went numb, but I never complained. Andrew grew up seeing my hands full of sores and my eyes sunken from exhaustion, but I always smiled at him. I promised him his life would be different, that he would never know what it was like to go hungry or walk around in broken shoes. And I kept that promise, even though it cost me years of tears and sacrifices. Little by little, with what I saved, I bought a better sewing machine, and then I started selling my own dresses at the market. People liked my simple designs, and before I knew it, I had clients coming from other towns. I saved dollar by dollar, until one day I managed to buy this land, the same one Andrew now thinks is his. There were no walls then, just a dream and a piece of dirt. I built the first room with my own hands, helped by a bricklayer who agreed to work in exchange for meals. We slept on the floor, on cardboard, but to me it was a palace. It was on that floor that Andrew took his first steps, where I promised myself I would never allow anyone to trample on us again. As I reminisced, I got up and opened the old photo album. The images were faded, but each one told a story. Andrew in his school uniform, the first dress I sold, the day I opened my small shop. In all of them, my smile was the same, even though there was so much pain behind it. What hurt me the most was not his ingratitude, but knowing that I raised him so he wouldn't suffer. And in doing so, I made him weak. I gave him everything without demanding effort. I defended him even when he was wrong. And when he wanted to fly, I cleared the sky for him. Now he was repaying me by throwing me to the ground of public scorn. I closed the album and picked up my notebook. On the first page where I had written my plan, I added a phrase. The hardest lesson is not given with shouts, but with the loss of what was thought to be eternal. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about money or direct revenge. It was time for Andrew to understand what it really costs to earn something, for him to feel the emptiness left by contempt. And above all, for him to understand that his fame had no value without roots, without love, without history. The next day, I went to see my lawyer, Mr. Peterson, an older man who had quietly accompanied me for many years. When I entered his office, he looked at me with respect, as if he already knew why I was there. Mary, he said in a measured voice, are you sure about what you're going to do? I nodded. More than ever. I don't wish him ill, counselor, but I can't keep protecting him. I want the money he thinks is his to disappear from his hands. I want him to face the world without my shadow. The lawyer opened the documents and began to sign with me every transfer, every change of ownership. As I did so, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. Every signature was a liberation. Leaving the office, the air felt lighter. I walked through downtown Los Angeles with a calm heart, as if I had just closed a chapter. I stopped in front of a window and looked at my reflection. My face had new wrinkles, but also a firmness I hadn't seen in years. In that moment, I understood something. I wasn't punishing my son. I was saving myself. Because loving is not allowing them to destroy you. Loving, sometimes, is setting boundaries and letting the other person fall to learn how to get back up. That night, as the wind blew through the curtains, I lit a candle in front of Ernest's photo. I'm sorry, my love, I whispered. I tried to raise our son with love, but I was wrong. I gave him so much that he forgot who I am, but no more. I blew out the candle and, for the first time in years, slept without guilt. The next morning, I opened the windows and let the light in. Birds were singing outside, and I felt like life was returning something I had lost. Peace. But in my heart, I also knew something else. The storm was coming. Andrew still didn't know what awaited him. The middle of the day brought a thick heat, the kind that numbs the body but not the mind. I was sitting on the porch, mending an old quilt that had belonged to my mother, when I heard the screech of heels on the stone path. I looked up and saw her coming. Lauren, impeccable as always, with sunglasses and a handbag that probably cost more than I had earned in an entire month during my youth. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, feigning enthusiasm, "it's so good to see you." I smiled courteously, but my intuition tightened like a thread. No one comes to visit wearing so much perfume without hiding something. "Come in, honey," I replied calmly. "Sit down. It's hot outside." She entered with slow steps, looking at every corner like someone evaluating a place that doesn't belong to them, but they believe they deserve. She sat on the sofa with exaggerated elegance and crossed her legs. "What a charming place," she murmured. "It has that vintage charm." It was the second time she had used that word with me. I simply smiled. "Yes, the charm left by time when you are not afraid of it," I replied. Her smile hardened for a second, but she immediately resumed her role. "You see, I came to talk to you about Andrew," she began. "He's very worried, Mrs. Johnson. He's been very stressed with everything going on in social media. And well, with you too." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Worried? He didn't seem so affected when he was laughing at me in front of thousands of people." Lauren let out a soft chuckle, as if trying to minimize it. "Oh, don't take it so personally. They were just jokes. Andrew loves you, truly. But you know how young people are. Sometimes they do things impulsively." I stared at her in silence. Her honeyed voice was starting to sound poisonous to me. "And what is it you want, Lauren?" I finally asked. She adjusted her hair and sighed. "Look, Mom, I'll be honest. Andrew is going through a rough patch. He has debts. Money is tight right now. Well, you have several properties that he always considered part of the family. We're not asking for anything unfair, just a little help." There was the truth. It wasn't a friendly visit. It was a negotiation disguised as concern. "Help?" I repeated slowly. "What kind of help?" Lauren lowered her sunglasses and looked directly at me, with that glint of avarice she didn't try to hide. "We know you have 2 rented apartments. You could sell one, or at least advance the rent money. It's temporary until Andrew stabilizes again." I felt a wave of heat in my chest, but not of shame or guilt. It was pride. Pride in knowing that they could no longer manipulate me. "I understand," I said serenely. "But tell me something, Lauren. Did Andrew send you, or did you come on your own initiative?" She blinked, hesitating. "Well, we discussed it together. We want to build a family, and with a little push, we could get ahead." I stood up slowly. "You know, Lauren, I also would have liked to have a push when I was raising my son, but I didn't get one, and I didn't go asking anyone for money. I worked until my hands bled, and everything I have here cost me sweat." She smiled coldly. "Yes, but times have changed, Mom. Now smart people know how to use what they have to their advantage." I looked at her calmly. "Then perhaps you should use your intelligence to look for a job." Lauren was startled. She didn't expect a response like that. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I'm not your bank or your husband's wallet. If Andrew has problems, he should face them like a man. And if you're here thinking you're going to convince me with smiles, you came to the wrong door." She stood up abruptly, red with fury. "You don't understand, Mom. Andrew does everything for you. The fame, The money, he does it all to give you a better life. I laughed, a dry, joyless laugh. No, dear. He does it for himself. If he really did it for me, he would look me in the eye instead of laughing at them. Lauren grabbed her handbag angrily and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Don't think Andrew is going to stand by. If you don't want to help him, you'll regret it." I closed the door slowly without saying a word. I stood listening to the sound of her heels, walking away down the path. I didn't feel fear. I felt an immense clarity. I went to my desk, took out the notebook, and wrote a new note beneath the plan. Never fear the one who shouts out of pride. Fear the one who is silent with certainty. That night, before going to sleep, I turned on the television. Andrew had posted another video, but this time something was different. He no longer looked happy. His gestures were forced, and the comments were full of criticism. It seemed the public had begun to turn its back on him. I smiled, not because I wished for his downfall, but because I understood that the universe had its own way of teaching lessons. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out the window. Outside, the moon was full and bright. "Lauren, honey," I whispered, "you just pushed your husband towards his destiny, and when the end comes, you'll be there too, right beside him." I took a sip of tea, closed the notebook, and before going to sleep, I knew that the worst had yet to happen. Life, like justice, always returns what is sown. And Andrew had sown too much poison to escape unscathed. The days following Lauren's visit were strangely quiet, too quiet. That calm that precedes a storm that you can already smell coming, even if you don't know where from. Every night as I closed the windows, I had that sharp feeling in my chest that something was brewing behind my back. I wasn't wrong. One afternoon, while making coffee, I heard a loud knock at the door. It was the mail carrier. He handed me a large envelope with the bank's letterhead. It wasn't just any letter. Opening it, I felt my blood run cold. It was a notification informing me that my main account had been temporarily intervened due to suspicious activity made from an unauthorized access. Movements that, according to the details, matched the secondary account number I used. Andrew. I set the letter on the table and took a deep breath. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stayed still, looking at the blue ink on the white paper, like someone contemplating an ancient betrayal that finally reveals itself. He had done it. My own son had tried to empty my savings. I went to the phone, called the bank, and confirmed what I already suspected. Andrew had submitted a false document with my forged signature requesting a transfer to his account. They stopped him in time thanks to a verification protocol. When I hung up, the trembling in my hands turned into a frozen strength. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of the old desk and opened the folder where I kept everything. Deeds, receipts, signed papers, and the notebook where I had been writing down every step of what I was experiencing. Every word, every memory, was now proof, not just of his ingratitude, but of my own resilience. At dawn, I called Mr. Peterson, my lawyer. "It's time," I simply told him. He didn't need to ask what I meant. "Mary, are you sure?" he asked in a serious tone. "More than ever." We set the appointment for the following morning. Meanwhile, I spent the day in silence. I prepared my house, organized the papers, cleaned the windows, not out of obsession, but out of a need to leave everything in peace before the hurricane. When I finished, I poured myself a coffee and went out onto the porch. Just then, the phone vibrated. It was a text message from Andrew. "Mum, I need to talk to you. Don't ignore me. I know you're mad, but I did it for your own good." I smiled. That, for your own good, was the phrase he had used to justify all his mistakes since childhood. Come tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I replied. He arrived punctually, with swollen eyes and a grown beard. Behind him, Lauren waited in the car, nervous, constantly moving her foot. He walked in without asking permission, as always. Mum, this got out of hand, he began, his voice cracking. I didn't mean to hurt you, really. I just needed help. I observed him serenely. Help? Or what was left of what you didn't earn? He frowned, annoyed. You have no idea what it's like to maintain a lifestyle like mine, Mum. People expect things. There are contracts, appearances. Then break those appearances, I interrupted him. Because what you're building is not a life. It's a farce. Andrew paced the room, his hands on his head. You can't understand it. I work every day. I record. I edit. I post. You don't know what it's like to have millions of eyes judging you. Yes, Andrew, I said calmly. I know very well. I learned it when you uploaded that video. He stood still, lowering his gaze. I made a mistake, he murmured. But you know I love you, right? Love is not shown with words, son. It's shown with respect. And you lost that a long time ago. There was a long silence. For an instant, I thought I saw the child he once was. But that flicker disappeared as quickly as it came. Fine, he finally said. If you don't want to help me, don't. But when all this crumbles, don't come looking for me. Don't worry, I replied. I don't plan to. When he left, I closed the door slowly and watched his shadow walk away down the path. It was the image of a man who had chosen his own abyss. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office. There I signed the last documents. Withdrawal of authorization, closing of joint accounts, elimination of privileges, everything. In the end, Mr. Peterson looked at me with a mixture of respect and sadness. You have done the right thing, Mary, but this won't be easy for him. I know, I said firmly, but maybe what he needs is not money, but a dose of reality. That same afternoon, the bank sent the notification. All accounts associated with the name Andrew Johnson had been eliminated. I knew the news would reach him in a matter of hours, and it did. That night, while eating a hot bowl of soup, my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a text, but a call. I answered. Mom! Andrew screamed from the other end, desperate. The bank blocked me. I don't have access to anything. My savings, my income, everything disappeared. I know, I replied without changing my tone. There was a long, tense silence. Was it you? He asked, his tone somewhere between fear and fury. No, I said calmly. It was you, Andrew. You were the one who destroyed what you had. I just took my hands out of the fire. He hung up without saying a word. I stared at the phone on the table, listening to the distant sound of the wind creeping through the cracks. I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. Because in that moment, I understood that sometimes a mother doesn't teach with hugs, but with boundaries. And that boundary was the beginning of the end. Not just for his money, but for the mask he had been wearing for years. I never imagined that the sound of silence could bring so much relief. The social media, the recorded laughter, the fake applause, everything that had enveloped Andrew for so long began to crumble, slowly but relentlessly. 1 week was enough. Just one. The first rumors arrived as whispers in the comments of his videos. What about his mum? Why did she disappear from the channel? That story was fake, right? Then, like an inevitable tide, the scandal grew. A news outlet published a story about the illegal transfers in his own mother's name. The title was brutal: Influencer accused of scamming his own mother. That morning, I woke up to the news on television. It didn't surprise me, but it did hurt. Not for him, he had already made his choice, but for the tragedy of seeing him turn into a stranger. The child who once hugged me, trembling in the storms, was now the man who stole from the roof that had sheltered him. I went out to the porch with my cup of coffee and looked at the horizon. In the air floated a strange calm, the echo of a battle that had already ended. And yet, destiny still had debts to collect. 3 days later, I saw him appear at the door. Andrew was no longer the same. His messy clothes, his pale face, the dark circles under his eyes, the trembling in his hands. Everything spoke for him. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. "Mum," he barely said, his voice broken. "I need to talk to you." I gestured for him to come in. He walked slowly, looking at the furniture, the photos, the corners he had ignored for years. "I lost everything," he finally confessed. "The brands cancelled the contracts. The collaborations stopped. Lauren left me." He let out a bitter laugh. "She said she wasn't built for failing in public." I remained silent, watching him. Not out of cruelty, but because I understood it was time for his own words to catch up to him. "You have no idea what it feels like, Mum," he continued. "Everyone walked away, my friends, my team, even my followers. No one answers my messages anymore, all because of a stupid mistake." "No," I interrupted gently. "It wasn't a mistake, Andrew. It was a choice." He looked at me, furious. "Don't lecture me now. You don't know what it's like to be humiliated by thousands of people." I leaned toward him, calmly. "Yes, I do. And you were the one who taught me how it feels." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Andrew lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't let them fall. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he murmured. "I just wanted them to see me, for someone to value me." "And you thought making fun of your mother would give you value?" I asked in a low voice. "What you did wasn't looking for love, son. It was begging for attention." He clenched his fists. "Everything I did was for you, to give you a better life." "No," I repeated. "You did it to fill a void that only you created." I walked to the shelf and picked up a photo of him as a child. "Do you see this child?" I said. He was happy with a rag ball and a hug. "What happened to that child, Andrew? Where did he go?" His eyes clouded over. For an instant, I thought I saw the son I once had. "I don't know, Mum," he whispered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself. He put his hands to his face and burst into tears. Not the theatrical sobs of the conveniently repentant, but a true, raw cry from someone who finally sees himself in front of his ruins. I approached, put a hand on his shoulder, and said tenderly, "I don't hate you, son, but I can't save you either. Everything you broke must hurt enough for you to learn not to do it again." He looked at me desperately. "Please, Mum, I just need some help. Alone, whatever. I swear I'll change this time." His words pierced my chest. My mother's instinct screamed at me to hug him, to give him another chance. But my soul, that wounded part that had learned to resist, told me not to. "Money isn't what you lack, Andrew. What you lost was respect, and that can't be bought." He remained silent, not knowing what to say. Then I picked up the papers I had prepared on the table and handed them to him. "This is the only thing I'm going to give you." He opened them with trembling hands. "What is this?" "A list of available jobs in the city. People who need honest hands, not borrowed fame. His eyes widened in disbelief. You want me to work? Me? Yes, I replied calmly. Just like your mother did all her life. Andrew let the papers drop to the floor. I can't believe this. Me neither, I said. I never thought you would turn into a stranger. He remained silent for a long time. Then, without another word, he got up and left. The door closed with a dry thud, and for an instant my soul trembled. But I didn't run after him. Not this time. That night I lit a candle for him, not out of compassion but out of hope. Because even if his fall was hard, I knew it was necessary. Sometimes, to be reborn, one has to lose everything, even pride. As the flame danced in the darkness, I knew the worst was over. Now, all that remained was to wait for life to do its thing. Winter arrived early that year. Mornings dawned wrapped in a fog so dense I could barely distinguish the trees on the path. I liked that silence, that cold solitude that brought with it a peace I had taken too long to know. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind always returned to the same point. Andrew. I didn't hear from him for weeks. No one saw him. No one mentioned him. His social media was abandoned, the accounts closed, the followers gone. It was as if the whole world had erased his name. Part of me wanted to believe that he had finally learned something, that life was teaching him what I no longer could. But another part feared the punishment was too great. One afternoon, returning from the market, I saw a hunched figure near the town square. A young man, with an old blanket over his shoulders, was playing a poorly tuned guitar. He had a cap tossed on the ground for coins. As I got closer, I felt my heart stop. It was him, my son. He was thin, pale, his hands cracked from the cold. His hair, once so carefully styled for the cameras, was long and messy, and his gaze was no longer that of the arrogant man I knew. It was that of someone who had fallen beyond imagination. I stood in front of him without saying a word. He looked up and, for an instant, didn't recognize me. But when he did, his expression broke. "Mom!" he whispered, his voice choked. My hands trembled. I didn't know whether to hug him or turn my back. I looked at him, and in that face, aged by defeat, I saw the child I had raised, the little one who cried from fear of storms. "What happened to you, Andrew?" I asked, my voice low, almost a sigh. He dropped the guitar and lowered his head. "Everything is gone, Mum. Everything. I was left with nothing. Lauren reported me for debts. They took my car, the apartment, the channel. Even my friends blocked me." He laughed bitterly. "And the worst part is, no one remembers me for my work, only for what I did to you." I closed my eyes. I felt a mixture of sadness and justice. Not because I saw him defeated, but because I understood that finally life had spoken for me. I approached slowly. "Where are you sleeping?" I asked. "In the shelter when there's room, otherwise here." "And are you eating?" "What I can. Sometimes I play to get something." His voice trembled, not from the cold, but from shame. I watched him for a long moment. I had wanted him to understand what effort meant, and now he did, at a price that was perhaps too high. "Mum," he said suddenly, "I'm not here to ask you for money or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I get it, that now I understand everything, every sacrifice, every word of yours. And I'm sorry, truly." Those 3 small words cut through me like a knife and an embrace at the same time. I didn't hug him, not yet, but I took a step toward him. Sometimes, son, there are wounds that don't heal with apologies, but they are cured with time and actions. He nodded in silence. We stood there, face to face, while the wind dragged dry leaves to our feet. Then, without saying more, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded $20 bill. Take this. It's not much, but it'll get you something hot to eat. I can't accept it, he murmured. Not after everything. I'm not giving it to you as a mother, I said. I'm giving it to you as a woman who knows what it's like to go hungry. He took the bill with trembling hands, and his eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he whispered. I promise I'm going to change. I don't want you to be ashamed of me anymore. I'm not ashamed, Andrew, I replied. It hurts, but I'm never ashamed of you. We looked at each other in silence. He sat back down with his guitar, and I slowly walked away. Every step I took weighed like a stone, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain fall on the roof tiles. I thought about him, wet, with his guitar, singing songs no one listened to. Part of me wanted to run out, bring him home, give him food and shelter. But I knew that doing so would destroy the little learning life had offered him. At dawn, I lit a candle and prayed for him. Not for his material well-being, but for his spirit. May he find his way, I said softly. May he understand the value of things before it's too late. The days passed. From time to time I saw him from afar in the square, singing, helping other homeless people. There was something different about him. He was no longer seeking attention, but redemption. And then I knew that finally the seed had germinated, not of fame, but of humility. That night I wrote the phrase that would close that chapter of my life in my notebook. Sometimes justice is not served with punishment, but with learning. And when life teaches, not even the most wounded mother can refuse to see the miracle. I closed the notebook with a silent tear on my cheek. My son had fallen. But for the first time, he was beginning to get up. Several months passed since that afternoon in the square. Winter slowly retreated, leaving behind an air of renewal. The garden flowers were starting to open again, and every morning I was surprised by the song of the birds, as if life was reminding me that there were still things to smile about. During that time, I didn't see Andrew again, but I heard murmurs here and there that he had gotten a job at a carpentry shop downtown, that he had cut his hair, that he no longer played music in the square, but was helping other homeless people find work. I didn't know whether to believe it, but a part of me wanted to, perhaps because, despite everything, he was still my son. One morning, while watering the plants, I heard footsteps on the path. Turning around, I saw him. He was walking slowly, his clothes clean but simple, a small bunch of flowers in his hand, and his gaze lowered. My heart skipped a beat. It was him, but he wasn't the same. "Good morning, Mum," he said, in a gentle voice. "Good morning, Andrew," I replied, trying to keep my calm. "What brings you around?" He smiled faintly. "I work nearby, at Mr. Jackson's carpentry workshop. I pass by this street every day, and today I got up the courage to come in." I observed him in silence. There was something new in him. His eyes no longer shone with arrogance, but with weariness and sincerity. It was the gaze of someone who had known the weight of the world. He walked in slowly and left the flowers on the table. "They're for you," he said. "They're not expensive. I picked them from the side of the road. But I wanted to bring you something." I touched the petals tenderly. They were wildflowers, simple, but beautiful. Thank you, son. You can't imagine how much value they have to me. We stood for a while without speaking. He looked around, as if rediscovering the house where he grew up. Everything is the same, he murmured. Even the clock in the hall still sounds the same. Time changes things on the outside, Andrew, I replied. But inside, only what you are willing to heal changes. He sat down in front of me, his hands clasped. I've thought a lot about you, Mum, about everything I put you through. I hope you've also thought about yourself, I said softly, about how you got lost in the middle of all that noise. He nodded, lowering his head. You were right. Everything I had was a lie. I lived dependent on the likes, the numbers, what other people said. I thought that made me important. But the only real thing I had was what you gave me, and I lost it because of my pride. I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to tell him so many things, but I held back. I had learned that silence sometimes says more than words. Now I work with my hands, he continued. I don't earn much, but I sleep peacefully. Every piece of furniture I make reminds me of you, of how I watched you build this house with effort. It makes me proud, Mum. For the first time, I feel like what I have belongs to me. A tear rolled down my cheek, although I tried to hide it. He saw it. He stood up and gently took my hands, as if afraid of breaking me. I'm not here to ask you for anything, he said in a trembling voice. I just want you to know that I'm trying to be better, that I learned, even though it cost me everything. Andrew, I whispered, true repentance is not spoken, it is lived, and you are living it. He smiled, and in that smile I finally recognized the child I had raised. Suddenly his gaze turned serious. Mum, there's something else. I went to the bank. I've been saving a little every week. It's not much, but I want to give back what I took from you. I shook my head. No, son, money can be recovered, but respect cannot, and you are already giving that back with every action. He broke down. He hugged me, and this time I didn't push him away. I felt his tears on my shoulder, tears that had been held back for years. Did I fail you so much, Mum? Yes, I replied tenderly, but you are also learning to get up. That's what counts. We stayed embraced for a long time, as if time were going backward and the past was dissolving in our tears. There were no reproaches, no pride, no hatred, only a mother and a son reuniting at the most human point. Before leaving, he turned back to me. I don't know if I can ever fix everything I did. You don't need to, I told him. Just keep being worthy. That's enough. I walked him to the door. As he left, the wind moved the curtain and I felt the house breathing differently, lighter, more alive. Andrew walked down the path without looking back, but I knew he would return. This time, not as the son who believed he owned everything, but as the man who finally understood the value of what can never be bought. Dignity. That night I lit a candle and opened my notebook. I wrote a final sentence for that day. Sometimes children return not because they need a home, but because they finally discover that their home was the mother who waited without resentment. I blew out the candle and smiled. For the first time in years, I slept with a peaceful heart. The dawn of that Sunday came with a soft glow, the kind that seems to cleanse the soul. I opened the window and let the fresh air in, the aroma of fresh baking from the neighborhood, the distant crowing of roosters, the murmur of life awakening. Everything had a different meaning, perhaps because, for the first time in many years, my heart felt light. 3 months had passed since Andrew's last visit. We kept in touch, but in silence, with respect. He called every Sunday afternoon to see if I needed anything, and I, although I always replied no, was grateful for his gesture with every word. He had learned to listen, and above all, to be silent. That morning, while pouring coffee, the phone rang. It was Mr. Jackson, the owner of the carpentry shop. "Mary, do you know what your son did?" he said in an emotional voice. "What happened, Mr. Jackson?" I asked, fearing bad news for an instant. "Come to the town square, but come now. You have to see it with your own eyes." I put on my coat, not understanding anything, and hurried out. The air smelled of damp earth and something I couldn't name. Hope, maybe. When I arrived at the square, I found it full of people. There were cameras, microphones, and in the center, a small wooden stage. And there, standing with a microphone in his hand and a serene gaze, was him, Andrew. He wore a simple shirt, his hair neatly combed, and that posture that only those who have decided to confront their own past possess. He saw me in the crowd and smiled. I stood still, not fully understanding. "Good morning, everyone," he said in a firm voice. "Some of you know me for who I was. A man who sought fame, attention, and applause. A son who forgot where he came from." There were murmurs among the people. He took a deep breath and continued. "For years I made strangers laugh and humiliated the only person who always loved me. I turned tenderness into contempt, respect into mockery. Today I don't come to justify myself, but to ask for forgiveness. Not only from my mother, but from all mothers who were once humiliated, forgotten, or used by their own children." The silence became absolute. No one spoke. Not even the wind dared to interrupt him. My mother taught me that dignity cannot be bought, that love is not shouted, it is shown. I made her cry, but she never wished me ill. When everyone turned their backs on me, it was her silence that saved me. I saw him pause for an instant, swallow, and then lift a small piece of carved wood. "I made this with my hands," he said. "It's a gift." He showed the figure. It was a sculpture of a woman sitting, her hands in her lap and a serene look. Her face was mine. "I will call her Mother of Patience," he continued, "and she will stand here, in this square, to remind us that the greatest strength is not in shouting, but in resisting without hatred." Tears blurred my vision. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. Andrew put down the microphone, stepped off the stage, and walked toward me. People made way. When he stood in front of me, he knelt down. "Mom," he said with a broken voice, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it every day. If you let me, I want this story to end not with shame, but with pride." My legs trembled. I looked at him in silence and stroked his hair, just like when he was a child. "Andrew," I whispered, "you no longer have to earn my forgiveness. Just don't lose it again." He hugged me tightly, and the people who had been silent all that time began to applaud. Some were crying, others smiling. But I only listened to the sound of his heart against mine. That rhythm that reminded me that although life can break us, it can also put us back together. When the applause stopped, he turned back to the crowd and said, "Sometimes social media shows the worst of us, but today I want this video to show what is truly worthwhile. A mother's love, forgiveness, redemption." And in that moment, I understood that the circle had closed. The son who had made me cry in front of a screen was now honoring me in front of the world. As evening fell, the sculpture was installed in the center of the square. The golden sunlight bathed its surface, and the wooden face seemed to smile. Andrew took my hand, and we walked together for the first time in years, without words, without masks. Arriving home, I lit my notebook and wrote the final sentence. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it illuminates the path to tomorrow. And when a son returns repentant, a mother's heart beats peacefully again. I turned off the light with a calm soul. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the old garden tree, and in that soft murmur, I could swear I heard the voice of Ernest, my husband, whispering to me. "That's it, Mary. You did it." I smiled through tears, because finally my son had come home. Sometimes life presents us with trials that seem unfair, as if destiny wants to measure how much love can fit in a wounded heart. But today, looking back, I understand that every tear, every silence, and every night of loneliness had a purpose. Not to destroy me, but to show me the strength I always had. My son and I learned, each in our own way, that love is not demonstrated with gifts or empty words. It is demonstrated with respect, with humility, and with the courage to acknowledge mistakes. Because there is no wound greater than contempt, and no medicine more powerful than forgiveness. Now, when I pass by the square and see that sculpture with my face, I don't feel pride or vanity. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for having resisted, for having waited, for not having responded to hatred with hatred. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is peace. And you who are listening to this story, remember, it is never too late to ask for forgiveness, nor to grant it. Life always gives a second chance, but only to those whose hearts are willing to change. And before saying goodbye, I want to give you a special invitation. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment below with which city you are watching us from. Every day we share new life stories, full of emotion, lessons, and hope. Because in this space, every story has a soul, and every soul deserves to be heard.